The gunshot that shattered the silence of Eagle Creek was not aimed at anyone, but rather served as a warning, a declaration that the dusty town of barely 200 souls had a new problem on its hands. Meredith Zimmerman stood frozen on the wooden boardwalk outside the general store, her hands trembling as she clutched her worn leather bag. It was 1876, 3 years since she'd buried her husband and child, 3 years since she'd spoken more than necessary to anyone in this forsaken corner of Colorado territory. "Miss Zimmerman," Sheriff Taylor called from across the street, his voice laced with frustration rather than sympathy. "That cousin of yours is causing trouble again at the saloon." Meredith nodded, her eyes downcast. Another mess to clean up. Another reason for the townspeople to whisper that Meredith Zimmerman was bad luck, that grief had made her peculiar, that she was simply too sad for decent company. She crossed the rutted Main Street, the hem of her plain brown dress collecting dust. The summer heat pressed down mercilessly, but she barely noticed any more. Very little registered beyond the constant ache in her chest, the emptiness that had become her only companion. The saloon doors swung open before she reached them, and out stumbled her cousin Henry, shirt torn and lip bloodied. Behind him stood a tall figure Meredith had never seen before, a man with broad shoulders, a weathered face, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," the stranger said, tipping his hat, "I believe this fella belongs to you." Henry spat blood onto the dirt. "This bastard cheated at cards." The stranger's expression didn't change. "Insulting a lady's ears with that language won't help your case, friend." Meredith sighed. "He's not my responsibility, but I suppose I'll deal with him anyway." She grabbed Henry by the arm. "Come on, you've made enough of a spectacle." As she turned to leave, the stranger spoke again. "Name's Noah Olsen, madam, just passing through." Meredith didn't respond. She'd learned that strangers just passing through were the kind you needn't get to know. They'd be gone with the next sunrise, like so many promises carried away on the wind. What Meredith didn't know was that Noah Olsen had no intention of simply passing through. Not anymore. Noah watched as the woman with sad eyes led the drunk man away. He'd seen plenty of hardship in his 30 years the war, the harsh realities of the frontier, the loneliness of the cattle drives, but something about her sorrow seemed different. It wasn't dramatic or attention-seeking. It was quiet, resigned, like she'd made peace with pain as a permanent resident. "That's Meredith Zimmerman," the barkeep said, noticing Noah's lingering gaze. "Lost her husband and baby boy to scarlet fever, been walking around half dead herself ever since." Noah nodded, turning back to his whiskey. "Seems like everyone's got a story out here. Hers is sadder than most. Town's mostly given up on her. Too depressing to have around, they say. Woman barely speaks, barely lives." Noah considered this. He'd come to Eagle Creek on business to deliver a herd of cattle and maybe find work for the winter. He hadn't planned on staying long, but something about Meredith Zimmerman's quiet grief stirred something in him. The next morning, Noah found himself outside the small dressmaking shop at the edge of town. A hand-painted sign in the window read, "Zimmerman's Fine Sewing and Alterations." He straightened his vest, ran a hand through his dark hair, and stepped inside. A small bell announced his entrance. Meredith looked up from her work, needle poised mid-stitch. Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by caution. "Mr. Olsen," she said, her voice soft but not fragile. "What can I do for you?" Noah held up a shirt with a torn sleeve. "Got caught on a fence post. Thought you might be able to mend it." She nodded, setting aside the dress she'd been working on. "That's simple enough. I can have it ready by tomorrow." "Much obliged." He hesitated, then added, "How's your cousin today?" A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Nursing a well-deserved headache and making plans to leave town. Henry never stays anywhere long, and you've been here a while, I take it." Meredith's fingers stilled on the fabric. "Yes, 3 years and 4 months." Noah noticed she didn't elaborate. Didn't explain that this was where she'd buried her family, that this was where her happiness had ended. He respected her privacy. Well, Miss Zimmerman, I've decided to stay in Eagle Creek for a spell. Rancher outside town needs help with his cattle through winter. I see. She resumed her work, her expression unchanged. I expect I'll need more mending done. I'm hard on clothes. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Most cowboys are. It wasn't much, that tiny smile, but to Noah it felt like striking gold. Over the next 3 weeks, Noah found increasingly creative reasons to visit Meredith's shop. Torn shirts, loose buttons, a hat that needed reshaping. Each time she was polite but distant. Each time he tried to coax a little more conversation from her, the townspeople noticed. The whispers began. What business did a handsome cowboy like Noah Olsen have with the town's walking shadow? Didn't he know she was bad luck? Didn't he know she was too sad for courting? Meredith heard the whispers. They weren't new. She'd been the subject of gossip ever since she'd refused to snap out of it after losing Matthew and little Thomas. The town expected grief to follow a tidy timeline, a few months of mourning, then back to normalcy. They didn't understand that some losses changed you forever. On a cool October evening, Noah appeared at her door just as she was closing shop. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Evening, Miss Zimmerman, I brought you something." Meredith hesitated. "Mr. Olsen, I don't think, it's just a thank you for all the mending." He held out the package. Reluctantly, she took it, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving of a bluebird. "My pa taught me to whittle when I was a boy," Noah explained. "Not much of an artist, but birds are simple enough." Meredith ran her finger over the smooth wood. "It's lovely, but unnecessary. Maybe so, but I wanted you to have it." He shifted his weight. "I also wanted to ask if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant tomorrow." Meredith's eyes widened. "Supper, Mr. Olsen, I don't, Noah," he corrected gently. "And yes, supper. Just food and conversation." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Noah looked at her directly. "Because every time I see you, I want to know more about you. Because your eyes hold stories I'd like to hear. Because everyone deserves good company over a meal." Meredith clutched the wooden bird. "The town thinks I'm too sad for company." Noah's expression softened. "The town is wrong about a lot of things, I suspect, and your sadness? It doesn't scare me." "It should," she whispered. 7 o'clock, he said, stepping back. "I'll be waiting whether you come or not." After he left, Meredith stood in her empty shop, the wooden bird warm in her palm, wondering when she'd last had someone really look at her without pity or discomfort. She didn't go to supper the next night, or the night after that. But on the third evening, something changed. Perhaps it was waking up to find another small wooden carving, this time a rabbit, on her doorstep. Perhaps it was the persistent kindness in Noah's eyes whenever their paths crossed. Or perhaps it was simply time for something to change. The hotel restaurant fell silent when Meredith walked in wearing a dress that wasn't black or brown, but a deep blue, the color of the evening sky. Noah stood immediately, a smile spreading across his face that made him look younger than his years. "You came," he said simply. "I did," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. That night they talked. Really talked. Noah told her about growing up in Missouri, about fighting for the Union in the war, about drifting west afterward because home didn't feel like home anymore. And Meredith, to her own astonishment, found herself speaking of Matthew, how they'd met at a church social, how he'd courted her with poetry he wrote himself, how they'd dreamed of a cattle ranch of their own someday. "He sounds like a good man," Noah said when she fell silent. He was. Meredith twisted her napkin in her lap. "I don't talk about him, or Thomas. It makes people uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Noah said. "Grief is just love with nowhere to go. Seems to me it honors them to speak their names." Tears pricked at Meredith's eyes. Thomas had just turned 2. "He loved horses, called them all go-go." Noah smiled. "A born cowboy." "Yes," she whispered. "A born cowboy who never got the chance to ride." They sat in silence for a moment, but it wasn't awkward or heavy. It was a silence that acknowledged pain without demanding its immediate resolution. "Miss Zimmerman," Noah said finally, "would it be all right if I walked you home?" The walk back to Meredith's small house behind her shop was slow and peaceful. The stars were bright overhead, and the night air carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. At her door, Noah removed his hat. "Thank you for joining me tonight." Meredith nodded. "Thank you for asking, and for the carvings, and for—" She hesitated. "For not being afraid of my sadness." Noah's expression grew serious. "Your sadness is part of you. It's shaped you, made you who you are. I'd never ask you to pretend it doesn't exist. Most people do. I'm not most people." He stepped back. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman. I hope we can do this again." As winter descended on Eagle Creek, Noah became a regular visitor at Meredith's shop. He brought her small carvings: a deer, a fox, a bear. She mended his clothes with increasingly intricate stitches, adding subtle embroidery that only someone looking closely would notice. The townsfolk watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Many believed Noah was wasting his time on a woman too broken for love. Others whispered that it was a kindness, what he was doing keeping company with the sad widow out of pity. But Noah knew better. With each passing day, he saw more of the woman beneath the grief: intelligent, thoughtful, with a dry wit that emerged when she felt comfortable. She wasn't broken. She was wounded, and wounds could heal given time and care. December brought heavy snows that blanketed the town in white silence. Business at Meredith's shop slowed as travel became difficult. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Noah arrived with a basket covered by a checkered cloth. "Thought you might be running low on supplies," he explained as she let him in. "Brought some essentials from the general store." Meredith's small living space behind the shop was neat and sparsely decorated. A single photograph of a man holding a small child sat on the mantel, the only visible reminder of her lost family. "You didn't have to brave the storm," she said, taking the basket. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." Noah stomped snow from his boots. "It's getting worse out there." Meredith glanced at the window where snow was piling against the glass. "You shouldn't try to get back to the ranch tonight. It's too dangerous." Noah hesitated. "I don't want to impose. You're not imposing if I'm inviting you," she said firmly. "I have a spare room. It's small, but it's warm." The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days of close quarters, of shared meals cooked over Meredith's small stove, of conversations that stretched long into the night. 3 days that changed everything between them. On the second evening, as they sat before the fire, Meredith finally asked the question that had been on her mind for months. "Why did you really stay in Eagle Creek, Noah? You could have moved on after delivering that cattle herd." Noah stared into the flames. "I stayed because of you." "Because you felt sorry for me," he shook his head. "No, because the moment I saw you, I recognized something in you that I understood. Loss changes us, makes us cautious, makes us build walls. But it also makes us see the world differently, more clearly sometimes." "And what did you see in me?" "Strength," he said simply. "The kind that's quiet but enduring, the kind that gets up every morning and faces the day even when it feels impossible." Meredith was silent for a long moment. "The anniversary of their deaths is next week, December 12th. Noah nodded. "Would you like company that day, or would you rather be alone?" "I've been alone for the past 3 anniversaries." She twisted her hands in her lap. I think I'd like company this time." When the blizzard finally cleared, Noah reluctantly prepared to return to the ranch. Standing at Meredith's door, he found himself reluctant to leave. "I'll come by on the 12th, he promised. Meredith nodded. "Noah," she said hesitantly, "thank you for staying, for seeing me." On impulse, Noah reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the house. "Meredith," he said, using her first name for the first time, "your sadness has never been a burden to me. It's been my reason to stay." The 12th of December dawned clear and bitingly cold. Meredith woke early, her heart heavy with familiar grief. She dressed carefully in her best black dress, pinned her hair neatly, and walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. The gravestones were simple. Matthew James Zimmerman, beloved husband; Thomas Matthew Zimmerman, cherished son. Meredith cleared away the snow that had accumulated and placed the small bunches of dried flowers she'd brought. "Hello, my loves," she whispered. "Another year has passed." She sat on the cold ground, not caring about her dress, and told them about her year, the shop, the weather, the small moments that had gotten her through. And for the first time, she told them about Noah. "I think you would have liked him, Matthew," she said softly. "He's kind, honest, good with his hands." She touched the small wooden bird she'd brought with her. "He sees me, all of me, even the sad parts. He sounds like a wise man." Meredith turned to find Noah standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands, a bouquet of winter greenery and dried berries in his arms. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making room beside her. Noah laid the greenery on both graves. "Mr. Zimmerman Thomas," he said quietly, "I want you to know that she speaks of you with great love, that she honors your memory every day by continuing to live with courage and grace." Tears slid down Meredith's cheeks. "I also want you to know," Noah continued, "that I will never ask her to forget you. You are part of who she is, and that's the woman I've come to admire more than any other." Meredith's breath caught. "Noah," he turned to her, his eyes serious. "I love you, Meredith, not despite your grief but alongside it. I don't expect you to feel the same. I just wanted you to know that someone in this world sees you completely and loves what he sees." For a long moment, Meredith couldn't speak. The words "I love you" seemed to hang in the cold air between them, visible as their breath. Finally, she reached out and took his hand. "I don't know if I can love the way I did before," she admitted. "But I know that when you're near, the world feels less empty, and I know that I want to try." Noah squeezed her hand. "That's all I ask." They stayed at the cemetery until the winter sun began to set, speaking sometimes of Matthew and Thomas, sometimes of the future, sometimes not speaking at all. When they finally rose to leave, Meredith felt lighter than she had in years, not because her grief had vanished, but because she no longer carried it alone. As winter gave way to spring, Eagle Creek watched in amazement as Meredith Zimmerman slowly transformed. She still wore simple clothes, still spoke softly, still carried the memory of her lost family. But now she also smiled. Now she sometimes laughed. Now she walked with Noah Olsen on Sunday afternoons, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The townsfolk who had once whispered that she was too sad for love now whispered that Noah Olsen must be a miracle worker. But Noah knew better. The change in Meredith wasn't his doing, it was hers. All he'd done was give her the space and time to heal at her own pace, to find her way back to living without abandoning her grief. On a warm day in May, Noah took Meredith riding into the foothills. They stopped in a meadow dotted with wildflowers, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "Remember when you asked why I stayed in Eagle Creek?" Noah said as they spread a blanket on the grass. "Because of me," Meredith replied, a small smile playing at her lips. "Because of my sadness." "Partly," Noah agreed, "but also because I was tired of wandering. After the war, after losing my parents, I couldn't seem to stay in one place. Nothing felt right. And now I've found a place that feels like home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I've been working on this for weeks," he said, opening it to reveal a carved wooden ring. "It's temporary. I'll get you a proper one if you say yes." Meredith stared at the ring, then at Noah. "I'm not asking you to forget Matthew," he said quickly. "I'm asking if you might have room in your heart for a new chapter, for a life with me." Meredith touched the ring gently. "It's beautiful." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she whispered, and for the first time in over 3 years her smile reached her eyes. They were married in June, a small ceremony with only a few guests. Meredith wore a dress of soft green instead of wedding white, a new beginning rather than a first beginning. Noah wore his best suit, the one she'd mended and embroidered with tiny leaves along the lapel. Sheriff Taylor, who had once seen Meredith only as a problem to be dealt with, stood as a witness. "Never thought I'd see the day," he admitted at the small reception. "You proved us all wrong, Mrs. Olsen." "About what?" Meredith asked. "About being too sad for love." Noah, overhearing, put his arm around his new wife. "She was never too sad," he said firmly. "The rest of you just didn't know how to embrace her sadness as part of who she is." That night, in the small house that was now theirs together, Noah gave Meredith his wedding gift, a carved wooden box filled with letters. "What are these?" she asked, opening the first envelope. "Letters to Matthew and Thomas," Noah explained, "telling them about our life together. About how we'll honor their memory, about how I'll care for you." Tears filled Meredith's eyes as she read the first letter. "I thought we could write to them together," Noah said. "On birthdays, anniversaries, a way of keeping them with us as we build our future." Meredith looked at her husband, this man who understood that love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about creating space for what remained alongside what could be. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I didn't think I would ever say that to anyone again." Noah took her hand, running his thumb over the silver band that had replaced the wooden one. "And I love you, Meredith Olsen. Sadness, joy, and everything in between." As the years passed, Eagle Creek grew from a dusty frontier town into a proper community. Noah and Meredith built a life together on a small ranch outside town, where he raised horses, and she continued her sewing business. They had their struggles: a drought that nearly ruined them, a winter so harsh they lost half their livestock, the continuous challenge of merging past and present. But they also had joy. In 1878, Meredith gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a strong-willed girl with Noah's gray eyes and Meredith's quiet thoughtfulness. In 1881, a son joined their family, William, named for Noah's father. Both children grew up knowing about Matthew and Thomas, whose photographs remained proudly displayed in their home alongside new family portraits. Every December 12th, the family would visit the cemetery together, bringing greenery and sharing stories. As the children grew old enough to understand, they added their own tokens: drawings, small carved animals that Noah taught them to make, wildflowers collected on summer rides. And every night, Meredith would look at her husband across their dinner table, surrounded by the family they'd created, and marvel at how life could contain such sorrow and such happiness in the same heart. On their 20th anniversary, Noah presented Meredith with a rocking chair he'd made himself, carved with bluebirds, like the first gift he'd ever given her. "For when we're old and gray," he said with a grin, "watching our grandchildren play." Meredith ran her hand over the smooth wood. At 45, her dark hair was now streaked with silver, and fine lines framed her eyes that had learned to hold both memory and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Staying in Eagle Creek because of a sad woman who barely spoke to you?" Noah sat beside her, taking her hand in his weathered one. "Not for a single moment. Your sadness was never something to fix or overcome, Meredith. It was part of your story, our story." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "When Matthew and Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy again." "Not despite the sadness," Noah said softly. "Alongside it." Meredith nodded. "Alongside it." Outside their window, the Colorado sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their children's laughter drifted from the barn, where they were tending to a new foal. The wooden bluebird, the first gift Noah had given Meredith all those years ago, sat on the windowsill, worn smooth from years of being held. "Your sadness was my reason to stay," Noah murmured, echoing words spoken long ago. "And staying has been the greatest joy of my life." In that moment, as they sat together watching the sun set on another day of their shared life, Meredith knew with absolute certainty that love wasn't the absence of pain or the forgetting of loss. Love was the courage to carry both joy and sorrow, to honor what was gone while embracing what remained. Love was a cowboy who saw beyond her grief to the woman beneath, who never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all.